All right, I think let's kick off today's discussion. As usual, questions and questions. If you have any questions during the discussion, even if it's not on topic, even if it's about something that you have on your mind or that we've chatted about in a previous discussion, feel free to drop them in chat, in Twitch chat, that is. Otherwise, you have a Discord server as well, which I have open. So there's a questions and answers channel in there. Feel free to drop your questions in there as well. What is Code to Career? The aim of Code to Career is to create a community for software developers, especially those with little to no experience. It's a place for them to get information, what to expect in the working world. I have worked with many juniors and interns over the years, and this is my way of trying to help them bridge that gap when entering the professional space. A few disclaimers. I am not claiming to be any kind of expert. I will share what I have learned and what I have seen, what I know new employees struggle with. But not everything works for everyone. You have to pick and choose what makes sense for you, what fits with your style and your attitude. We will talk about things that can seem very abstract. That is what happens when you have little or no experience. You have no way of understanding unless you've been in those situations or in those environments. Remembering what we talk about will shine a light on these situations when we encounter them. There are a wide range of companies, cultures, and environments out there. So there is a decent chance that we talk about things that you will never encounter in your career. Nonetheless, forewarned is forearmed. There are exceptions to probably every single thing I say. Situations are rarely simple, and it is only our lack of understanding that make them seem simple. Lastly, I am South African, and my experiences and knowledge is based around the South African market and South African companies. Since these videos are available for anyone in the world to watch, please keep that localization in mind. Today's topic is, what do companies want in a developer? Or the other side of that coin is, help companies want you. We will discuss a number of topics based around what we don't realize companies think about when they are considering individuals. What are the processes that occur from you thinking, oh, I need to find a job, to a CV landing on someone's desk, to that person actually being interested in calling you in for an interview or taking you on board. And the different ways that individuals go about crossing this space to essentially get themselves into the door and try for a position. Firstly, it's important to learn to write a good CV. Less is more. Anything more than 2 pages is largely bad practice. You have to think of it from the perspective of the manager or the recruiter who are reading these CVs. They see, in some cases, hundreds of CVs a day. They only have one concern. Is it worth my time reading the CV? And they will make their decision in under 20 seconds. So you have a very small window to make a positive and lasting impression. Most of us will get at least one, if not most, of our positions through a recruiter. But it is important to understand the role of recruiters and to understand that, like all things, there are good sides and bad sides to using recruiters. As a positive, They are good because they can help you set up a CV that companies are used to. They also have access to lots of companies, and they can push your CV to companies that will be most interested. They know the local market, which companies are looking for, or which companies are looking for which type of developers. As someone who is just entering the market, it can be incredibly important to use a recruiter who will help you get through this process in the beginning. And the reason is because it is all so foreign. But as time goes on, you will start to see, if you pay attention, some of the downsides to recruiters. They will make your CV look like all the rest, as they use templates that all CVs must conform to. You need to think about how you want to represent yourself in your CV. Learning that and leaving that to others will not serve you well. Recruitment is a business, and their ultimate aim is to close the deal with the client. This does not serve you well if you are trying to negotiate a better salary. How does the recruitment system work? Essentially, the recruitment agency will get a cut of your annual salary when you sign up with the company. Let's say 10%. This number differs based on the company, based on the number of individuals they take in via a particular recruitment company, and a number of other factors as well. However, the consequence of this in many cases is that your cost to company is your annual salary plus 10%, which goes to the recruiter. So companies will usually only negotiate up to 90% of what they're willing to pay you, since the 10% is reserved for the recruitment fee. And this hurts in the long run. By the time you've moved to your fifth company, losing out 10% each time really starts to add up. So it's to your benefit to try to find your next position by yourself. Not only does that give you the power to negotiate yourself, it makes you think about how much you should be paid, and this is something that very few developers do. A point that's kind of glossed over here is this idea of losing out 10% each time. I mean, it's just 10%. So why is that such a big deal? It is. And the reason it is because almost every single position you take on will base your salary on your current salary. And so if you're starting off earning, let's say, a nice rounded 10,000 Rand a month, if you lose out 10%, you're going to be at 9,000 Rand a month. If each position gives you an additional 50% that you take on, that 10% is going to become bigger and bigger with each position that you take on. So each time you're losing out 10%, it really starts to accumulate. And like I said, the reason is because they're basing your next salary or your current salary based on your previous salary. It is very rare that you can go to a company and say, okay, I want this much money, and not have them ask you, okay, but how much are you currently getting? Or in some cases, the companies may even ask, okay, I want to see a copy of your current contract or a current pay slip so that we have proof that this is how much you're earning. So it's important to be aware of this transition and this growth as time goes. And the reality is, because of this, you can end up in a scenario where you have two senior developers who are earning vastly differently simply because of what the experience was reaching this point. So it's a long game. It's not only about how much you're getting currently in this position. It's about keeping your eye on the prize, about thinking in the long term and understanding what you're trying to aim for 3 positions or 5 positions down the line, and how much of that gap you can cross with each position that you take. As is mentioned previously, though, it's not all about the money. There are lots of other considerations to take into account. However, almost all developers will say that the amount that they earn is important, if even though it may not be the only consideration. And this takes us to our next topic, and it is most definitely a hot topic. It is the idea of connections. The, the reality of finding work is that it's about who you know and then what you know. Who you know gets you in the door. What you know is what allows you to stay. You have to find some system that allows you to meet people who can open doors for you. Go to dev meetups. Go drinking after work on Fridays with company people. Play golf with managers and other higher ups. Find something. This form of thinking becomes incredibly important as you go further down in your career. It is not something that applies now when you're trying to find your first job in many cases or are in your first job. However, it is something to be aware of because it's not something that most of us can just turn on overnight. It's something that we gotta slowly work up to, we gotta slowly put into practice, we gotta slowly start to get the hang of. And for that reason, it's important to start thinking about this earlier rather than later. It's often hard to move out of the senior dev role and into a leadership role while moving between companies. They want internal people for those leadership roles, people that the other developers and other team members have worked with, not a stranger. The exception to this in many cases is unless you can make a connection call. This way of thinking is incredibly uncomfortable for many people. For some, it's that they feel it's unfair. However, for most cases, it's just about getting to the door. The person in question still has to pass the tests to get through the door. Other people feel it's unfair to those who are not comfortable around people or are not very sociable, don't drink or don't play golf, etc. The reality is, all of these are skills that can be learned. They can be improved. It is not unfair when someone has naturally brilliant problem-solving skills. So why should it be unfair when someone has a different set of skills that helps them? To ignore this reality is to stick your head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist. It exists. People will use this to move their career forward. Get used to it and start to use it. Because when your friends or co-workers are being promoted to managers and directors and architects, you will regret not starting years back. This is an unfortunate reality of the working world, of the corporate world. And I've seen a number of developers who are incredibly introverted, who you would not on any day of the week say that this is someone who is comfortable socializing. Yet, with their focus on career growth and moving up the corporate ladder, they learned to do it. For many of them, it's not straightforward in a sense of being sociable, going drinking, playing golf, etc. They've found their own ways to make it work. They've found their own groups. They've started their own groups in some cases and used that technical strength to get others to come to them. In some cases, it's particular technical groups. In some cases, it's about um, starting a movement within a company to try to help people grow, to help interdepartmental communications, and use those spaces as a mechanism to be able to get managers in, to get those who are higher up in the company to recognize them, to to be able to open those doors to allow them to move up the corporate ladder. So there are the examples I've listed are very obvious ones, but in many cases it's about seeing the environment that we're in, seeing the industry we're in some cases, and trying to use that to move our career forward. It's about thinking outside of the box. Having said that, I have seen also developers who do none of it and their careers move forward, they make their way up the ladder, they are recognized for what they do, and that's fantastic. And the best of luck to them. It seems in many cases like they've got plenty of luck already. But the important thing is about us as an individual to recognize where we are and to try to make and find the best options and opportunities that we can. So if you're in an environment where you can see individuals don't get recognized easily and people have to step up, or management and upper management are a very sociable bunch, and if you're not going and hanging out with them and going on company meetups and lunches and things of that sort, you're not really going to be seen. You got to recognize that. You got to see it for what it is, and you got to make a decision to yourself to say, okay, am I going to put the effort in and get into that space, or this is just not for me and I'm not interested and I don't care, and I will find a different way to do it. Main thing is you're thinking about it, recognizing it, and you're trying to find a way forward. You should not be thinking about these things when you've been a developer for 10 years, for 15 years. You should be thinking, even if you don't action it in your early years, it's something that you should be thinking about, keeping an eye open, reading up on it, just being aware of it so that you can grow and so that you can move forward down the road. Right. Another important aspect is to learn to interview well. Practice with people you know. Go regularly for interviews, even if you're not actively looking to move. You'll get to know people and companies in your industry, and you'll have practice that will help you in the long run. In my opinion, interviews are about two things: being comfortable and fitting in. So often, being uncomfortable or nervous, scared or shy can make it really difficult to tell if you will fit well in the company. And when they can't make a decision, essentially they'll make no decision. And that ultimately means will be rejected. Company will usually know 90% if they are going to hire you based on your skills before the interview. The interview is about getting an idea of your character and how well you will fit into the culture of the company. And this comes back to something that I've said previously, which is you can teach a person to write code, to problem solve, but you cannot teach them to fit well with a culture or with a particular team. That based on the team's culture and based on the team's personalities and based on yours, you are either going to fit in and work or you're not. So in many cases, your ability to write code is almost secondary to in terms of getting chosen. So you really need to be calm in an interview. Be yourself, talk about you even while you're talking about your previous experiences. 99% of interview questions are well known. If you research, study, and get comfortable with what gets asked, you will be fine. But you have to put in the work and you have to put in the practice. Find some friends, practice with your friends. If you don't have anyone who's interested, join a community. Ask for assistance, do a Skype call, but practice. Find a way to do it. So often, so much of the nervousness and stress of an interview is because you don't know what's coming. It's unknown, it's scary. And the pressure makes it worse because you want to succeed, you want to show your best self. But what if they ask a question that you don't know how to answer? Again, if you go read up on good interviewing skills, one of the most common pieces of advice would be when you're going for an interview, you'll be offered something to drink. Ask for water. And the reality is, when you're asked a question, take a moment, take a sip of water. It will give you a few seconds to absorb the question so that you're not pressured into answering. And secondly, you can think about it. You've given yourself that space to calmly think about it. And within a few practice attempts at using this mechanism, you will very quickly become much more comfortable with answering questions, with thinking about your answer one or two steps before answering. The reality is, you do not even need the glass of water. It is almost something to give yourself the excuse to take time to answer the questions. Almost always, interviewers are very happy to give you a few seconds, even 30 seconds, to answer a question. I've seen a question being asked, and someone will sit there, think a bit, they'll think a bit. In some cases, it'll be like, sorry, just give me a second if you guys don't mind. Reality is, we don't mind. We're happy for you to spend a bit of time and just think about your question, think about your answer, and put forward the best answer that you feel you can come up with. So like I've said previously, 99% of interview questions are well known. So with a bit of work, it is very rare that you'll come up with a question or come up against a question that's like, oh my God, I don't know how to answer this question. So that's the thing. You know, put in some practice, put in some effort, and you will get the hang of it. They are not nearly as scary as many of us think they are. It is simply because it is not something that we're used to. And because we don't practice, unfortunately, we don't get used to it. So what makes it worst over time is you go for a few interviews as a junior or for your first position. You may kind of start to get the hang of it. You may get a little bit more comfortable. And more than likely, that will go a long way towards eventually helping you land your first position. And then you'll be a junior. And maybe 2 or 3 years later, 4 years later, you'll be looking for an intermediate position. And you'll start applying, and you'll start going around for interviews, and you'll go to your first interview, essentially for an intermediate position. And you may be fairly chilled compared to your first interview ever. You'll probably be a lot more chilled. And you're going to get a surprise because you're going to have the mindset that, you know what, this interview is going to be the same as the previous interviews. And the smallest thing, smallest difference is going to create that fear. Your heart is going to start pounding. Oh my God, I am back into the unknown. I am back into the scary place. And that's going to happen again and again because as you go to intermediate, as you go to senior, the interviews are going to be different. You're going to be asked different questions. As a senior, you will probably face 1 or 2 questions about leadership. Do you see yourself going into a leadership role? Any number of different questions. And so, again, you need to practice, you need to prep. It's interesting how I've spoken to a number of developers who have gone to an interview, and within the first 1 or 2 questions, and in some cases, before they even go into the actual interview, perhaps from seeing the office, from seeing the area where the company is, or any number of other factors, they may decide, well, you know what, I don't want this position. It looks good on paper, but I'm not liking what I am seeing. But now they're already there. They're committed to the interview, and so they go through the interview. And what happens is, once that pressure is taken off, that, you know what, I don't care. So many of them are like, you know what, at the same time, it was like one of my most amazing interviews. I was just off the cuff. I was happy to answer whatever. I was happy to talk about myself. I wasn't too concerned to talk about work. And it was great. So, from that perspective, it just shows that the difference of being comfortable in an interview and not having that pressure and stress on us versus having that. And a lot of that, like I said previously, comes from it being unknown, comes from it being scary. So practice, read up. There's plenty of videos and articles on good interview skills. Like always, see what fits for you. Always take context into consideration, simply because if you're going for your first position, taking a lot of advice about being a senior developer and interviewing in that manner is not going to help much. So take that into consideration. There's lots of specific advice and there's lots of general advice. Learn to tell the difference. It is absolutely critical to learn how to read a payslip. Payslips are different from company to company, and you're not going to see one look much like the other. They have different levels of detail, and some companies put basically all the information on the payslip, including 80% of which will never affect you directly, and some companies put extremely little information. So Learn to tell the critical information from the noise. Right? Always ask for a dummy payslip before accepting a position. Often, when you're talking numbers, be it with your recruiter or be it with the company directly, different companies may use different numbers. Right? Learn to tell the difference between basic salary, net salary, gross salary, and cost to company. Because how each of those affects what you will get paid, what benefits you get, they are all different. And if you're not sure, go to HR and ask them to explain it to you. Every single company, the HR department has been happy to help, because it is the worst thing for them for you to come after receiving your first pay slip either to the manager or to HR and say, no, 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 no. This is the number that you told me in the interview, or this is the number that's on my contract, and why is that number different on my pay slip? And that puts them in a sticky situation. That puts you in a sticky situation. So they are always happy to explain it to you, so that you're most well informed and both parties know what they're getting into at the end of the day. If you cannot clearly compare what you're currently getting with what you will be getting, you could get a painful surprise when you get your first paycheck. And I've seen this happen to any number of people. It is one of the things that I help juniors and interns with time and time again, to help them understand how a payslip is broken down, and in many cases to do that comparison, simply because you could be getting paid with one number in one format, and you could be looking at a position that you want to go to, different number in a different format, and how do you compare the two? Will I actually be getting more? What is the difference in my benefits going to be? So spend some time, ask for help, and more often than not, um, there are people within the company that are more than willing to help you. Again, this is one of the reasons that we are creating this community, to help those who are struggling, who don't understand. There is no general way of understanding payslips. In many cases, it's a case of looking at what payslip is sitting in front of you and trying to understand that particular payslip. So the big question for many of us who are very junior or trying to get our first job as a software developer is, what do I put on my CV that makes me stand out? The answer is simple and complicated at the same time. The simple answer: they want to see that you can commit to something and stay committed. Whether it's problem solving, whether it's code, whether it's technology, they want to see that you on your own can put in the effort and learn and make forward progress and get better at what you're doing. And unfortunately, where universities, colleges let you down in this manner is that companies largely view what you've learned during that time as spoon feeding. You're being told what to do, you're being guided along with what you have needed to do. And for the beginning of learning, this is important. So if those institutes did not do that, you would not have learned. You would have been very lost and very demoralized. But the reality is, to work as a developer, you have to be able to solve problems with no training wheels. And this is one of the biggest signs that companies want to see in terms of, can you do this? Can you get the hang of this? Will you be able to, even if it's 3 years down the line, will they be able to hand you a problem and you go and find the answers on your own with minimum assistance and guidance from your fellow developers? That is ultimately what they're looking for. Difficult part of this is actually expressing your ability to do so. And unfortunately, the difficulty of it is that there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, gamification of what goes onto CVs. Everyone's going to look for what they think is the best and most appropriate. Buzzwords are a big problem in a sense of, this person is saying that I am hardworking, or I'm really good at teamwork. But those are buzzwords. And unfortunately, many companies see right through them. You're saying you're good with teamwork, but when have you actually worked with a team? You're saying you're hardworking, but what have you done that has not been asked of you, that you've chosen to go and do on your own? So many of these ideas and these words often are ignored on CVs, especially for those who are very junior, because the difficulty is they're going to have a very hard time, if asked a few questions, to explain how what they're saying is actually a reality. So it becomes really difficult for you to actually say that you're good at something that is valuable to an employer. So in many cases, the reality is you can't say it, but you can get others to say it or prove it. And so I'm going to go through some ideas and entities that I've seen others use that have really stood out well for us in the past, and those that I would also, while I may never have seen them, I would consider as incredibly helpful or positive to see in a CV. For those of you who have done any coding, you most certainly would have heard of Stack Overflow. What you may not be aware of is that Stack Overflow has a very, very good profiling and ranking system for those who are willing to spend time and use the system. The advice I give is, if you've learned or you are wanting to follow a career in a particular technology, a particular language, register on Stack Overflow and start being part of the community. Use the hashtags and restrict your results on the issues that you want to look at, and start going through it. It's like I've said before, it's not about knowing every single word in the book. It's about knowing generally what is in the book, so that if you're interested in something, aha, I need to go and find this book. It's the idea of indexing. And this helps in that manner tremendously. Spend half an hour, spend an hour every single day, especially if you're not working and you're still trying to find work, or you're studying and you're on holiday in between in between lectures. When you have time, spend an hour or two daily. Go on to Stack Overflow, go to an area that you're interested in, and see what people are talking about. See what questions are being answered. The reality is, over and over and over again, the vast majority of questions that will come through are questions from those who are very junior. And what will happen is, as you go through those, you will find a number of posts that are at a level which you can understand. You will learn a little bit more about what they're talking about, but how this library works. And even if you don't, you will just read the question, and from the question, your brain will absorb a few words. You may read this question and go, I have not the foggiest what these guys are talking about. But the reality is, you're slowly starting to get some idea of what is the terminology being used. What is, how are these questions arranged? How are people asking these questions? What advice are the others giving them on how they should improve their questions? What detail to add into their questions? All of that will slowly start to get absorbed. You will slowly start to make more sense of what is going on. And you may come back to a question that you had seen 6 months ago, 3 months ago, and you may not know the answer, but you may suddenly be able to understand the question. And that in itself is a massive progress. And how will this help your CV? As you slowly start to learn even the slightest amount, you will know that little bit more than those who know nothing. And those who know nothing are those who are asking the questions. And so you can start answering those questions, even in a very simplified manner. You may not be an expert, but you may see a question asked 20, 30 times a day in some cases. And you can start assisting, you can start answering those questions to help those who have not come across this before to at least take one step forward to where you are. And in doing so, you start to get points. You start to get recognition within the system. And so in your CV, you can put in, here is my Stack Overflow profile, here is my username. And as an employer, I will see this and go, oh, okay, let's go see what this person has done. And you could have, I don't know, not many points, but the fact is, you're in the door. The guy has taken more than 20 seconds to look at your CV and say, okay, so here is someone who's actually trying something that's serious. Because, like I've said before, the idea of your ability to search, as some call it, your Google fool, how to put in a set of search parameters to get the most or best results as quickly as possible and not end up with your results on the 7th page of results. That is an incredibly good soft skill to learn. And the fact that you're spending time on Stack Overflow means that you're developing this skill. And many employers will recognize this. Many seniors or team leads will recognize this, and they'll know, okay, this is someone who's getting very comfortable with Stack Overflow, and that is going to help their efficiency. So that is something that I strongly suggest. Stack Overflow has many other resources outside of just finding answers to a particular question. They've got areas around all of these things that I've talked about, CVs, interview skills, getting in contact with companies, how to get in contact with companies. Unfortunately, some of it is helpful in the South African market and some of it is not, but it's all there. And while a particular piece of advice may not work for the South African market, you may get the spirit of what they're saying, and you may be able to find or come up with a South African version that works with you. So spend the time, go and look into it deeper, but strictly for your CV, having a Stack Overflow profile can help tremendously, especially when you're very junior and The reality is you have very little to put on your CV because you've not worked. Many of us are not spectacular with our results. I did my 3-year degree in 4 years, simply because I failed a critical second year course, and so I had to repeat the second year. In my case, my excuse is it was the year I met my wife, and I'm sticking with it. But in my case also, it was not all lost because there were only 8 courses that you can do in my case for your double computer science degree, but they offered 12. So in the year that I repeated, I did 4 third year courses that I would not have done otherwise. And then I did the 8. So I was one of the few developers who actually came out with a triple degree rather than just the double comps as many come out with. So for those of us who don't have spectacular marks, who don't have some sort of spectacular, I won. Our group won the third year group group project or anything like that. We got to try to find our own way to shine, and it's not a matter of only the winners win and everyone else loses out. The reality is companies are happy to find a space for developers almost no matter how good or how bad you are. So, from that perspective, it's about trying to get yourself in the door, and then the company will find a place for you. There are a number of different what's called competitive programming sites, groups, and areas that you can get involved in. And this not only gets you exposure to those who are very serious about code and can really show you how far you can go as a software developer, but it also exposes you to a number of tournaments and events that are out there. And when you take the time and to learn about them, get involved with them, all you need to do is finish one to have something that you can put on your CV. So from that perspective, you can show that, I've learned something. I've spent the time to go and actually do this tournament on my own, because there's no one out there, varsity or campus or Technicon or institute that's telling you, we want you to go and do these courses. Occasionally a lecturer may, but there's no one that's where this is part of the curriculum. So it is definitely something that will show that you can go and do something on your own. Something I've said previously is that one of the best ways and one of the most important things that you should do before you become a senior developer is to go out and learn a language on your own. The reality is, with a lot of languages and libraries and frameworks that are out there, over the past 10 years, they have realized that if we do not have a community, we as a technical entity will not survive. We will be outgrown and outlasted by those who do have a community, who do have interest, and who do get funding. So from that perspective, many of them have adapted to make the entry into their space as easy as possible, as comfortable as possible. And so, in the past, if you look at web frameworks, 10 years ago, it was like the Wild West out there. You only were a good web developer because you happened to dig all over the internet and forum posts to find out how things were done. No one did documentation for anything. Tutorials, what is that? And that was 10 years ago. And then the likes of Google with Angular and Facebook with the React framework, they came along and they said, listen, we need a way to get back-end developers to come and do front-end work. And the problem is this Wild West space that exists for front-end web code is terrible because they're coming from strict, controlled, strongly typed languages where every single misstep that they make is being rejected by the compiler, and they have very strict guardrails. And then you're going to toss them in the Wild West. They're going to last maybe 1 or 2 days, and they're going to be like, I don't know what is going on here. I'm out of here. I'm going back to my backend code. And so from that perspective, they started making everything as clear and approachable as possible, because they said, we're not going to have any developers who are using our framework if we cannot make it accessible to them. So they started building their frameworks in that manner, very structured manner, very good documentation, tutorials that are very simple. You can have written almost no code before, and you can sit and follow these tutorials step by step. Strong community to assist those who are struggling. And with that, they made a lot of progress, and it almost started setting the standards for, if you're a new framework, if you're a new language, this is the bar you got to follow, because if you do not, you're just not going to get the community in, and you're not going to become popular enough to survive against someone who does become popular enough to survive, to get recognition from big companies, get the funding from that. So from that perspective, a lot more languages now are accessible to those with almost no coding experience. So that's why I say, go do it. You will learn a massive amount. And the fact that you can show, oh, I've gone and done this tutorial, and actually I speak about that next, so let me just go into that. Do a completed tutorial with customizations to prove that you can actually work with what you have learned, not just copy and paste the code. So exactly like I was saying, to show that you can go and learn something on your own, show that you can figure it out, that you can be committed to it, and the customization part is very important. And the fact that you can show something that's out there kind of works both ways. On the one hand, you could say, you know what, I'm a normal software developer, but I have gone and learned this very specialized artificial intelligence programming language. You can't use it anywhere else except for in doing artificial intelligence in this particular way, as an example. And on the one hand, you could say, you know what, I'm never going to use this in the first 10 years of my career easily. And you're going to end up with two scenarios when that's on your CV. You're going to have the manager who's going to look at this again and going to ask, why? Of all the more relevant things you could have done, they're going to ask you why. Why did you go and learn that? So have an answer for that ready. But you're also going to have those who are going to look at this and say, listen, look at this guy. He's going and learning something completely out of his scope, completely out of his training and what he has studied. And he is trying, and he's making progress, and they recognize the effort. And they recognize not just the commitment, but the willingness to go out there and try. So that's something to keep in mind. Do tutorials. Another thing is coding tournaments, which come in, well, at least 3 flavors, but there are 3 very big ones that I'll list here now, right? Firstly, pure code tournaments, such as Google Code Jam. In one of my previous videos, I showed you a video of this competitive programming individual who essentially solved, I think it was the Google Code Jam, in something ridiculous like 15 minutes, where the kind of the time you have is 3 hours per question, and there are 5 questions in total. So he essentially did about 15 minutes at the extreme, or 15 hours at the extreme of work in 15 minutes, I believe it was. So, this is a space that you can get involved in. The competitive programming is not the only one. There are a number of different forms that this can take, but the aim is purely for code and purely to learn and in a very technical manner. So that's one space you can get involved in. If you're the kind of developer who's done well, for whom code comes easily, understood well, this would be a strong recommendation because it is taking that understanding to the extreme. Then secondly, lighter, more focused tournaments, such as those done by Coding Game. Right? Coding Game, for example, is based around learning artificial intelligence, both simple and complex. So simple as in the same kind of skills and tools you will learn if you're doing a first or second year AI course at whatever institute you're studying at. And in their case, there's a very wide range of languages supported, and it's very good for those with little coding experience. They start off with working examples. You're allowed to tweak, you're allowed to play with it, you're allowed to try to understand and make sense of what you're doing. You can ask questions, there's an open chat, and there are many who are there who are willing to assist. And the idea of it is it's a lot more fun. It's a lot of it is very visually good looking. It's always got a theme, so it's about pirates or racing or spaceships or any number of these ideas. Many of these competitions, while they're coding competitions, can be full-blown games within their own right, and most of them take the perspective of you will write an AI, someone else will write an AI, and for you to progress, you got to beat your group of AIs, where your group is essentially those whose AIs are kind of in the same level of sophistication. And as you do better, you kind of go higher up in the ranks. And as again, these tournaments, at least the ones by Coding Game, are maybe once a month or once every 2 months, and they usually last maybe from beginning of a Friday to midnight on a Monday, maybe 4 days, and maybe some of them are longer even. But you kind of take part in, and every second day perhaps they will introduce new capabilities that your ship can do, or that your car can do as it's racing around the track. And so in that sense, they're incredibly interesting to get into. They're not just, okay, you got to sit and work for 7 days to solve this thing, to try to get anywhere. There are many different levels, and they're very good for those who are starting out. And once the actual competition or the tournament is done, those are put onto their site. So at any time after that, you can go and kind of set your own targets. So take your own time and say, listen, I'm going to spend maybe a half an hour a day, and let's go and see what I can do on this tournament. on this particular tournament and try to move forward at your own pace and learn what you can. So the coding game is one, but there are a number of others that are of this manner, and aim being to try to learn, but in a fun and interesting manner. Yeah. Then another set of these tournaments are around coding, but not code specific. And what I mean by that is it's not about the code, but it's about what you can make with the code. One example is, I'm hoping I pronounced this correctly, Ludum Dare Game Jam. Make the best game you can make in a set amount of time, compete by yourself, or you can compete as a team. And these are, when they do happen, they're more rare than the other two types, but when they do happen, they have a very large presence. Many developers and many teams are out there working at this. And one of the reasons is because in these tight constraints, it is where you can sometimes find a game mechanic that you may not see in the rest of the gaming world currently, and that these individuals will come up with an idea, and game companies they love this stuff because it is really difficult to come up with new ideas that people really enjoy and they can really get involved in. So there's a lot of drive by game companies, there's a lot of drive by developers, and many individuals and many teams take part in these game jams to try to come up with something that's interesting. So that's another area that, especially if there's a group of y'all can get involved in, and if you can do one of these and you can make a game and the game is available, this really can shine on your CV, because now it's not just about your ability to write code. Now it comes into the other factors as well. For example, you can say, I'm good at teamwork. I have great teamwork. Everybody puts that on their CV. But you can say, I have great teamwork because the team of 4 of us, we built this game for the game jam. Here's the link to the game if you want to go check it out. And then you can actually say, here's an example of me working as a team in a real situation on our own. We're not being handheld. We're not being told how to behave, as is often the case with projects and with projects at institutes where, like I say, a lot of the training wheels are there, and it's not as good of a reflection of your ability to work as a team as when you're working on your own. You got your deliverable up front, you got to figure out what you're going to deliver. So that kind of experience can really go a long way to having something on your CV really shines. All of these and any of these show that you are serious about being a developer and will reflect very well on your CV. Another, not quite as focused as some of these, but in the region of code, is what I call a code skill profile, which is essentially improving your coding skill and having a profile to kind of show what level that skill is at. An example of this is Code Wars. So you can kind of pick a language and you start off at a very low level, maybe spend a half an hour or an hour a day, or go through 1 or 2 problems a day. And as you're going through these problems, you will get points and your skill profile will go up and can kind of reflect on where you are in terms of your technical ability to solve problems. So I've seen a number of companies that use this where all the developers in the company are on the site and they all have the profiles and people are competing to try to get ahead of each other. If you are in that scenario, if you enter the company where you're in that space, please, I beg of you, take it seriously. I have seen scenarios where a company is going through a really tough time and they essentially use Code Wars as their primary decision maker to let you go. And the reason is because they are developers who will give it a serious effort and keep pushing. That's the one type. Then there's the second type, which will start. They'll keep up with the more serious developers for a little while, maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month, and then they'll kind of slack off. That's kind of the second group. And then the final group, unfortunately, is those who may do one or two and then just go whatever. I got work to do. I don't have time to sit here and play Code Wars games. And those, unfortunately, are the developers who are going to say, you know what? We are trying to do things here as a team. We're trying to create a culture, and you are not being part of that culture. So if you're if you can spend the time on a site such as Code Wars and build a profile, again, that is something that you can put on your CV that shows you're not only serious about improving your skill, it also is a form of culture that you're bringing into the department. Because you can come in and you can have a certain profile, and a manager or a team lead could very easily say, okay, guys, we've got Mr. John over here who's joining us today. And along with that, we are all starting on Code Wars. So go and create your profiles, etc., 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 and find some way to integrate that into their culture, which is something they would not have done had you not brought it to their attention. So it is another thing that can be incredibly helpful and that can help you to shine well. And because it is adaptable to your skill level, you will it will be a good reflection of what your technical skill is, much better than what marks you got. And especially when you're a junior, what you know 1 month and what you know the next month can be drastically different, because in that time that you're learning big concepts. And that can really push your skill forward very quickly. Unlike when you get later in your career and the concepts that you're learning are much more specialized and are much more fine-tuned, and you're really going to be learning a whole massive big new thing. So in that sense, having something like a code skill profile, where just spending those 30 days since you wrote your last exam and since you're putting together or since the first manager is going and looking at your Code Wars profile, daily you could be moving forward. And 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months, 4 months, they can see that you're so much further ahead compared to someone who's not doing anything and is only relying on their marks that they've achieved at university. So these kinds of tools are incredibly helpful on your CV and are a much more serious reflection of capabilities and your commitment that companies will take seriously. So spend the time, even before you can finish your studies, if you have the time, spend your time, look into it, learn about it, and at the very least, you'll have something to talk about when you're in your interview. All right, so that's kind of the discussion that I've gone through today. So time for some Q&A. Questions are a little bit all over the place today, so let's start with Discord. All right. How should I dress for an interview for a dev position? Suit and tie seems a bit much, but I can never be certain. Okay, so there are two parts to this. The one part is, how do you want to represent yourself and the image that you want to create? And the other side of that is, what is the expectation from the company in terms of how you should dress? So, with Durban being a coastal city, we're kind of all over the place. I know companies that have a strict dress code, and you got to adhere to the dress code, as in there's a uniform. But you will be given the uniform, or you'll pay for the uniform, and that is what you wear, and that is what you wear every single day without fail. And so there is that one extreme. And on the other hand, you also have those who are basically, you can come in shorts and slops. If you're wearing a torn t-shirt, hell, you could carry your surfboard into the office while you're in your wetsuit and they wouldn't blink twice. So that is the other end. And that goes a long way towards what the expectation is in terms of your interview. So it would be helpful to, if you're going through a recruiter, you can ask the recruiter. Otherwise, you can kind of go and look at the company's site. Often they will have staff pictures and things like that on the site, and even their social media. Most companies on social media, and based on that, you can get some idea of what the expectation is. At least, certainly on the stricter end. Otherwise, if you don't have a clear idea, I agree that a suit and tie is a bit much. Well, at least a suit is almost definitely a bit much, especially since it's hard to look good in a suit when you're like 20. It just is a bit weird. Anyway, that's my opinion. Or at least, if you know you're gonna look good in a suit, have a suit that's gonna make you look good, then sure, go for it. But otherwise, if you're just gonna buy a suit that you don't know how to wear, don't do it. So a shirt for sure. A formal pants is a bit much. Almost anyone would not begrudge you wearing a pair of formal jeans. Carry a tie. You can always just keep the tie in your back pocket. And if you walk into the reception area and it's like, oh, this place is like super serious, and the impression you get is you should be wearing a tie, then wear your tie. But by the same token, if you're not going, if it doesn't look like a chill out place, a hectic place, you don't need to wear your tie. I don't think there is any scenario where wearing casual or super casual is acceptable in an interview. You may be sitting in with a team lead and two managers and they're all wearing shorts and slops. That does not mean you wear that to an interview. So, you don't, formal only helps you from the perspective of its ability to make you look good. There are some guys who are very serious about how they dress, what they wear. They will have tailor-cut suits. They will ensure that the color profile is fantastic. Their shoes are shining, and all sorts of other fashion stuff that they're aware of and that they know how to use. So if you're one of those people, fantastic, use it. It is a skill, use it. On the other hand, if you're just going to go buy a suit from Edgar's or from Woolworths and you're not even sure and the sleeves are too long and it's too baggy for you and it's not suiting your profile, don't. For almost any position, formal shirt, formal jeans, and a tie is plenty. And you can, like I said, a tie is something that you can go both ways on very easily and very quickly. So yeah, that would be my recommendation. But the best recommendation is do your research. If you know beforehand, it's best prepared. Otherwise, you're kind of going with general guidelines. All right, let's see. There's been a number of questions in the chat that I've kind of just going off. Right. What would be considered a fantastic CV? It should be to the point. You do not, when I was doing my CV in my earlier years, I actually bought a book to try to give me pointers on what the idea is behind the CV. And that is the most important thing, right? The idea of the CV is to get you into the door. You got to put in just enough to show that you can shine and that they should take some interest in you. You're not trying to take all 8 bags of information through the door. You just need to get into the door. So you want it to be very slim. I've seen team leads or managers who basically would open a CV, see that it is 16 pages long, and not even read it. They would not even know whose CV it is. They will just look at the page count and say, this person has not the foggiest. They could have been an excellent candidate, but because they have 40 emails, each with 3 CVs in them to go through, they're going to go quickly, and it's going to be about reject first and not ask questions. Because they know they will find candidates in all of those CVs who will get it right. So the idea of a fantastic CV is to be minimal. Like I've seen in some sections, in some CVs, in the personal information area that comes first, they will have 25 pieces of information in there, from your name to whether you have your driver's license to, I don't know, all sorts of things. And the reality is you almost need none of it. Really, I would say, your name, maybe 2 pieces of contact information like your cell phone number and your email address, and you're good. Because the reality is, that's not what they're going to look at. That's going to be, if there's a massive information there, that's going to be something the reader has to overcome to get to the golden nuggets that they're looking for to say, is this someone that I'm interested in? And if he has to spend 5 seconds skimming through this to just see that, this is just stuff that he's not interested in, that's 5 seconds that you've lost. So you want that to just be minimal. He must be able to look at this and say, okay, it's just your name. There's almost nothing there, so I can just skim past this and not care. And that's what you want, because the reality is, if he finds something that he likes, he will contact you. If he wants to know, listen, we're 40 Ks out of Durban, so you're going to need your own transport and you're going to need to be willing to travel, they will contact you and they will tell you this. And they will ask these questions of you, because that's what contact information is there for. It is not there to weigh down your CV and slow them down. And then, again, I've seen people who will basically put, okay, the really terrible things is like people who would scan copies of the degrees and the matric certificate. No, nobody cares. You say you have a degree, I take your word for it. Honestly, I don't really care beyond my ability to determine how good you are and what value you can bring to my company. The fact that you have the degree means, okay, I may add on an additional 10 seconds to see what you've got. If you're then going to go and list every single course that you've done in the 3 or 4 years that you've done your course, your studies, and then on top of that, simply put a pass or fail and neglect how well you've actually done in these courses, that is going to be another very quick shutdown of, I don't actually know how well this person has done. So from that perspective, don't put everything, right? Especially if you fail something. You don't have to put it, right? If you failed, but you managed to pass in the supplementary exam, put your supplementary code there. They don't need to know, right? Don't put long, 20-word titles for each of your courses, right? Find a way to shorten it, right? And do that. You want a course, you probably do not want to show, I'd say, more than about 4 or 5 courses. And it's got to find the balance of what you've done well in versus what is most relevant to someone who's hiring. If you did really well in networks and you did really well in a basic first year Excel course, you got to ask how much of value is an employer going to see in that versus just getting a passing mark in a much more relevant course, which they can see, oh, okay, so you've done advanced C++ in your 3rd year. You just passed, but it's good to see that you did it because it shows that itself shows that, you know what, just by passing, you have a certain level of knowledge and understanding and technical. So you got to try to find that balance. Keep it slim, keep it simple. 1, maybe 2 pages max. 2 pages is where you should go in when you have maybe going on for your 3rd job or your 4th job, to be honest. Then you can say, okay, because in that case, companies are looking to say, okay, I want to see, okay, you're a senior, you've been a senior for 5 years. What have you done as a senior? What have you been responsible for? Things of that. So then you can say, okay, I can have a 2nd page. I can put in maybe the 3 previous positions I was in, that kind of thing. But ultimately, what you can do should be you should be able to boil it down to 1 page. If you cannot do that, you've just got too much information. You're not even going to get into the door. So because they're just going to reject you because it is too much effort to have to go through that entire CV. So those are some. There's no easy answer. There's some people who are applying for design jobs or web design, UI design, who've come up with some fantastic ideas. They put their design into the CV while keeping the critical pieces of information there. And in that scenario, that is valuable. But if you're going to be a database developer and you're going to make a fantastic looking CV in terms of having a good background and having pretty borders and all of that, as an employer, I don't care. That stuff is just, if you're someone who just wants to read some critical information and there's all of this noisy stuff that's going on, that's going to work against you. So you got to take that into consideration. Keep context of what you're actually presenting and who is going to be reading this. And every tiny thing that you do, what value is it going to be bringing? That is something to keep in mind. Template CVs, copy and paste CVs are not great. And the main reason is because almost always they're not good. You're not going to find a very simple, good one-page CV template like what I am trying to describe. Yeah. All right. Let's see. Fantastic CV. How does one practice for an interview when the questions can be anything? Right. So here's the thing, right? There are two sides, and there are two sides to both sides. On the side of the person who's asking the question, right? There are questions that have been well defined and are known to bring value to a company, and that people will ask, and that interviewers will ask. And then there are those questions that are kind of there to test your mettle. Say, listen, how can this person handle something that they've not been exposed to? And so those are those curveball type questions, right? And those are the unexpected questions. It's like I've said previously, 99% of the questions that are not for the purpose of being curveballs are out there, because interviewing is not a new art, is not a new skill, it's not a new area of expertise. There's been lots of studies done, and the reality is there's a lot of information on what is good, but unfortunately, it is extremely difficult to tell how good a candidate is going to be simply from an interview. So that's the two parts to those who are asking the questions. And then correspondingly, those apply to you as someone who is receiving the questions. If you don't go and research, if you don't go and practice with others these kind of questions that every company is going to ask, there are plenty of lists of top 10 questions you got to know as a developer, and what are the best answers and how to answer them. And so you go and you read up on it and you will find the stuff. There's plenty of knowledge on the stuff. So, you can go and learn a lot of the stuff yourself. But ultimately, you're going to get asked a question that you do not know how to answer. For me, one of the most curveball questions I ever got asked was the interviewer sat there, he asked a few questions. Within about 5 minutes into the interview, which is pretty quickly, he then asked me, all right, so I have what I want. For the second part of the interview, I am giving you half an hour to tell me whatever you want. Whatever you want. You want to talk about your dog? Talk about your dog. Well, okay, he didn't say that, but he basically said, whatever you want. You can tell me whatever you want. I'm yours to listen to for half an hour. 10 minutes in, I was out. I was out of serious stuff to talk about. Okay, it was fairly early in my career, but it's this kind of thing where they want to test, okay, you've gone to the edge of what you're comfortable with. How are you going to handle going very quickly into the unknown? And that's what they're trying to test. And in these scenarios, the best thing you can do is to just keep calm. Don't stress out. Accept that you're not going to know the answer. You got to accept that within yourself first. And the reason is because there are no right answers for these questions. The answer that you can give is not going to be wrong. It's your reaction and your ability to respond to the question, the manner in which you take it, the manner in which you respond, the stress or calm that you show, quality of what you say that comes out. That's what's going to be important. They're not listening to your words and looking for the technical value in what you're saying. They're watching your response, how you handle it, and seeing your ability to handle stress and manage that. That's what they're interested in. So in those types of questions, and even if you're sitting with a question, you're like, I remember this question that was in one of the lists, but I don't remember what the right answer was. The only thing you can do Keep calm and answer as best you can. Reality is, like I've said previously, based on your technical ability, 90% a company is going to know whether they are very interested in hiring you or not. The fact that they've called you in for an interview speaks all onto itself. It's just about what is your character, what type of person you are, whether or not you're going to be a good fit for the team. Those are the kind of questions, in addition to perhaps clarifying some of the technical things, that they're going to want to know. For many of these interviews, we'll go into these interviews and we'll have maybe 5 questions that we'll ask, or we'll just wing it because we're going to ask these questions and we already know that we're interested in you. It's up to you to fail the question. And the main way you can do that is either you tank it terribly by not having foggiest idea about what we're talking about, and we're very mistaken about understanding your level of expertise or your level of experience. Otherwise, we'd never have asked you the question to start off with. Or you freak out and panic and some sort of emotional reaction to what is going on, and that then starts raising some red flags as to your character and your ability to handle stress and things of that sort. But it's important to keep that in mind. It's also important, while you may not see it so much in the South African industry, a lot of companies, even big companies, are reasonably chilled out in their interview process. For those who are in a more international space and you're applying to companies where there's a massive amount of demand and there's a large amount of pedigree to get into specific positions in those companies, those interview processes can get very brutal, they can get very hectic, and you have to be at that level and at another level of interviewing and skill to get into those positions. So for many of those, there is no preparation. You can do what you can do, but ultimately there are no guidebooks that are going to get you into those positions. It's about your experiences and whether or not you're going to be the right person for the job as far as that company is concerned. And in some of those cases, the interview process may be brutal. You may be going 4 or 5 interviews with technical assessments in between and any number of things, and it may end up coming down to 3 candidates, and you may get in because you remind the manager of his son who's now living overseas. So that's how these things sometimes go. So yeah, but that's a whole nother ball game and largely out of scope for this community that we're in. Oh, okay. I have interviewed at companies that have asked very out of the norm questions. Well, there's a reason, and you're almost always going to get one, especially as you start going into more senior positions where your ability to handle, respond to stress becomes more important. So yes, you will get these. You got to be able to, and it takes practice to identify them for what they are. They are purposely built curveball questions. There are no right answers. And as you go through these examples, the more you can keep the spirit of the answer, but answer in a manner that's more expressive of you and the way you think, the more valuable those answers can be. Because in the same way the interviewers know the questions are out there and we go and look for the good questions to ask and we know what the answers are, it is also to some extent a little bit encouraging and a little bit discouraging. You ask a question that you know has a stock standard answer, and then you see the interviewee answer the question in a stock standard, give us that same stock standard answer that we know is the answer to that question. It's encouraging and discouraging, because on the one hand, they made the effort to actually go and learn that. But on the other hand, we actually learn very little about them. We want your answer to the question, to see how you think, you work. And that's what's going to differentiate you from the other candidates. So knowing stock standard answers is good. Personalizing those so that they barely look like the stock standard answers while staying within the spirit of the answer is best. And we've seen I've seen some individuals who do that, and you don't realize they're doing it until you're at like the fourth, fifth question, and you realize this interview is going altogether too well. And then you realize, oh wait, I know what's going on now. This guy is really good at interviewing. So that's something to keep in mind. How do I improve my problem-solving skills to make myself more marketable to companies? That's a tricky one. Problem-solving takes a number of seemingly unconnected skills and connects them together in different ways based on you, based on where your mind works. Some people have fantastic memories and cannot problem solve to save their lives. And others, they have decent problem solving skills, but if they could just remember what code they wrote yesterday, their skills will get so much better. So there are two sides to this, right? And it revolves around the word marketable, right? How do I improve my problem solving skills? The only way really is to practice. Try to understand what problem solving is about, and try to understand where you need to spend your time and your focus. Focus is important. If you cannot sit down and not look at your phone or not go onto Facebook for more than 15 minutes, you're going to have a problem. So practice simply focusing. Sit down and say, right, okay, can I sit down for a 10-minute stretch 3 times within a 1 hour period? And take it bit by bit by bit and continuously improve it. Spend time improving it. So there's focus, memory again. Try to remember what you're doing. Try to find memory systems that help you remember. In many cases, simply being aware of it and trying to push yourself to remember, over time you will start to do it. Don't be too hard on yourself. Learning these real soft skills takes time, and you're going to get much more value out of 15 minutes a day than when you're at wherever you're studying, and you're going to go to 4 lectures for 1 hour each, and you're going to feel like you've learned something. No, you've just learned that there's this tip of an iceberg. Not even learned the tip of the iceberg, just that it exists. So to learn these skills takes a little bit every day. It takes consistency. And so that's another thing, to be able to be consistent. Will go a long way towards becoming a better developer and a better problem solver. Ultimately, problem solving is about tools. The more tools you have, more efficient you can be in solving your problem. You have to screw in a screw, and the only tool you have is a hammer. You can get it done, but it ain't going to be pretty. But if you have a screwdriver, it'll be a lot neater, and that screw is going to stay in a lot longer, and you're going to get a much better product and experience at the end of the day. So it's about recognizing this range of skills that go into problem solving Many of them I've talked about previously as soft skills. They're not code specific, but they help you become a better developer. Things such as typing speed, and learning to touch type, um, practicing your ability to focus and focus for lengths of time, um, taking breaks. As opposite as it is to focusing, it's about being disciplined in taking breaks. So don't sit and work for 4 hours at a stretch, because you're not going to be able to do it. Your quality is going to go down. So there's a number of these things. I've talked about some of them previously. I'll probably talk about some more of them in future videos. But there are a number of them. It's about paying attention to them, being aware of them. Hell, make a list of them if you have to, and every day just look at the list. And what you will find happens is that those items on this list will kind of start to become buckets in your head. And as you're working through things, you start thinking in terms of these buckets, rather than just mishmash of information that you're going through on a daily basis. And your brain is just randomly sorting them at different levels of efficiency. And as you become aware of these buckets, you become aware, okay, how easy it is for things to go in and out of specific buckets. How much can I hold in specific buckets? And I can go any number of ways with this analogy, but the idea is that you're aware of it and you can see, okay, I need to try to improve this, or this actually I've never had a problem with. It's always worked great, and I'm 15 years into my career and I'm still not having a problem with it. So I don't really need to spend much time improving that. I need to, it's a working system. It's not a working individual component. So the better you get the whole system working, the better you are at problem solving. And one of the biggest things to be aware of is being good at writing code does not make you a good problem solver. So if you start there, that is a good place to start at. Okay. Right, problem solving skills. Right, and then the marketability is a whole nother side of it as well, because it is really difficult to tell how good you are at solving problems in an interview. Even companies have tests. The companies who are dedicated to writing these tests determine how good your skill is. But the best they can do is to determine how well you know a framework, how well do you know a language, how much you've worked with it before. But the ability, that language, that framework, at the end of the day, is just a tool. And your ability to work with that tool and solve problems is a whole nother ballgame altogether. And that's really, really difficult to determine from an interview. So you can say many things about your ability to solve problems, but many companies on that specific topic are going to largely ignore it. They're going to look at all sorts of other things that hint to your ability, that they feel is your ability to solve problems. So, like I've said, those elements you can put on your CV will bode well, but ultimately, once we can see you 3 months, 6 months on the ground, can we get a clearer idea of the ability to solve problems. Right. What other recommendations would you give to a girl dev, seeing as the market is mostly men? I have been denied positions due to my gender before. Okay. Yeah, that's a tough one, and unfortunately, I have seen what you speak of. I've brought up previously the idea of company culture. That is going to go a long way to either assist or hinder you in your efforts. Something I've talked about, and there's two sides to this. The one side is the getting into the position. and being considered. And unfortunately, as employees, sadly, that's very much out of our hands. Where I have seen it based almost purely on gender, from what I can determine, it's been for their own sake. And the reason I say that is because there is some companies that have a culture within specific teams sometimes where it's not, it's guys being guys, and they want to be like that. They want to swear, and they want to tell terrible jokes, and they want to be loud and rowdy, and a feminine presence in that team, they just feel is not going to fit in. And so they may, based on what they can see, they may deny a position based on that. And it's not fair. The reality is the number of female a number of female developers that I've worked with have learned to manage with that. And this is not just a case of, a girl having to be like the guys and, and join in that culture. You know, they've developed a thick skin, and they know how to turn it on and they know how to turn it off in terms of dealing with those kinds of individuals around them. So yeah, it is difficult. It is very much a male-dominated industry, and I've seen any number of reasons as to why it is and why it should be and why it shouldn't be. So, unfortunately, it is what it is. Recommendations: try to you would need to develop a thick skin, because unfortunately there are a number of guys who do not have a filter. By the same token, you got to try to understand those around you, because there are a number of developers who struggle with women. What I mean by that is they're very introverted. They've had very limited contact with women in a non-family perspective, and they lack that that's the word even be that comfort around women to be able to communicate, to be able to talk to them, due to their lack of social experience through their lives. And many male developers are within that spectrum to some extent. So for many of them, they're shy, they're uncertain, they're not avoiding you and not talking to you because you're a woman. They're doing it because they don't know how. And so I've seen a number of women in this very situation who've had to kind of reach out, and it's as strange as it is. It's almost like trying to pet a very skitterish animal. Where you got to be very gentle, you got to be very calm in the way you do it, and you got to not be like, for lack of a better word, strongly female, because that's just going to make it more difficult for those kinds of individuals. So I've seen that kind of happen on both sides, where the women have kind of managed to traverse that gap with some of these individuals, and at the same time, on the other hand, where they get very upset because they feel like, what, the guys are not talking to me, and they're kind of sticking me in my own corner. And yes, there are some cases where guys will be guys and they don't want to expose women to that. however right and however wrong that may be. But by the same token, or like I said previously, also on the other hand, they don't know. They that kind of social interaction is something that they struggle with. Um, and the result of that I kind of seen have also go both ways in terms of some men will kind of withdraw and they won't speak to that person unless spoken to and minimalistically. And on the other hand, there are those who they don't know how to deal with this, so they go in the opposite direction, get very loud and overly macho and respond in that way. And these are some of the things that I've seen that makes it more tricky and more difficult for a woman to work in this industry. So yeah, that being denied positions due to gender before, yeah, that's not cool. But I've seen almost in the opposite to that. I've seen women be hired because they're women. Um, and because a particular role or a particular position would be more well suited to, for lack of a better phrase, a feminine touch or a feminine personality than a manly one. So that kind of also happens as well. There are those who've found a way to use that to their favor, or use the fact that they're female to their favor, and there's not really any one way. But I've seen developers or women who bring something different to the table, and they don't fail to highlight it, because they know 99% of the time none of the men would have thought of this thing. So there's that side of it as well. Would every day that passes it gets better? I'm seeing more female developers with every year that passes, and companies are more aware of this, and there are fewer and fewer developers, male developers, who are so strongly macho as to make women uncomfortable. They've, the more and more of the men who come into the industry now are much more rounded, much more socially adapted, which is good. I'm really glad for that. And in some ways, a lot of the men who don't want women to become part of their teams are much more on the old school side, and they are certainly being phased out. Let's see. Yeah, so I hope that helps. And if you have more specific questions, or additional questions, again, the Discord server is there. You're welcome to talk to me directly as well if you don't want to put it in a group. And any way I can help, any way I can assist. So, all right. Oof. All right. So I think that's it for questions. So I kind of planned out 8 sessions, but I missed Tuesday's session, so today is essentially the 7th session, but would have been the 8th session. But the 8th session was largely going to be an open Q&A. So, from that perspective, there was a lot of Q&A today as well. So there isn't really a plan to go forward from here. I was thinking I could try to, I could try to see perhaps just kind of have a lighter topic and perhaps a guest on going into the next 2 or 4 sessions. But the plan also is to kind of regularly, maybe once every 2 months, kind of restart the same set of 8 sessions. Because as time goes, I can try to pack more meaning into these sessions, and because this is a learning process as well for me. Yeah, the lockdown has kind of in some ways trapped me in my ability to put out a better experience for the stream. So it's not quite where I want it to be. So I want to improve the quality over time, and that's going to be kind of the look and feel of the stream as well as the actual content. As I kind of re-go through these topics and re-go through what I've talked about, kind of add more elements in there, remove some, perhaps break it down from 8 into a set of 12 if there's sufficient quantity. Already these last few sessions have gone on a little bit longer than I would have liked. But I will be looking at perhaps breaking them down further. But before I kind of get into that, I may look at perhaps the next 4 sessions doing a very light topic. Yes. Hopefully I can see if I can bring on some a guest for each session, so we can just kind of get some idea of how other individuals are out there, other than myself, in this industry, and perhaps we can make this a, a standard going forward in terms of there being at least one other person on session. Yes, but otherwise, questions and answers on the Discord server or on YouTube. All of these videos are being uploaded to YouTube, so just scroll down. The link is there. Additionally, anyone has any suggestions, any thoughts, even if it's not a question, you're welcome to drop them on any of the platforms. And we will take them into consideration. Otherwise, I think let's call it tonight. Let's call it a session, a good session. Thank you everyone for coming along. It has been a long one. There's no doubt about that. Easily our longest one. Yeah, and hang in there. Be safe, be well, and I think everybody, yes, enjoy the long weekend. And I think this is a long weekend. That's not just a South African one. It's yeah, enjoy. Glad you enjoyed it, Debbie. Yeah, and I think everyone be safe, be healthy, and let's go from good code to great career together. Thank you.